One wrong signature could cost you thousands, or worse, leave your home unsellable. Here's the thing, if you agree to the wrong terms, you lose control fast. So in today's video, I want to talk about the biggest mistakes sellers make and how to avoid getting trapped in your own deal. As you are probably aware, the housing market has changed a lot over the last couple of years. In fact, every week that goes by, the housing market seems to change a little bit more. And here's the reality, most of the agents in today's market haven't been in a normal market where homes sit on the market a little bit longer, where you actually have to negotiate, provide advice to sellers, and be able to communicate exactly what's going on. And because of that, a lot of agents out there at the moment are desperate. Your deal might be their only deal. So before you sign anything, whether it's a listing agreement to sell your home or a purchase agreement for a buyer to buy your home, I want to make it very, very clear on things that I think you should never agree to when going through that selling process. And the very first one I want to talk about is signing a listing agreement without some sort of an exit clause. Understand, a contract to list your home is a binding agreement. And many times when you sign that agreement, you actually feel stuck even when the agent on the other side isn't performing. And because the housing market has slowed down, it's not uncommon to see an agent want a listing agreement at least 6 months, maybe some cases a year, depending on the price of that home. And the last thing you want to do is get 2 months into it, have your agent not returning your calls, not being able to perform as they said they would, and now you're in a position where you can't relist your home, you can't fire them, or maybe even better yet, you're able to get a hold of that agent, but they won't let you out of the contract. So my recommendation is, before you sign a listing agreement with anyone, find out how they handle this situation. One of the common things I discuss in a listing presentation is how sellers can back out of the contract with me if they decide I'm not a good fit, or if they decide I'm not doing the marketing that they thought I was going to do for some reason. And the reason we have this conversation is because I want sellers to feel comfortable that they can back out of the contract for any reason if they don't feel like I'm performing the duties that I promised to them. I don't want someone to be held to a contract because they signed it. I want somebody to work with me because they want to work with me, because they feel like I'm doing a good job, because they feel like I'm the best candidate to help them get top dollar for their home. So the one way to avoid this as a potential seller is have the listing agent write something in the contract that says that you can cancel for any reason if you're not happy with their services. Now, with that said, also ask them, if you do cancel, is there any sort of fee? Because as an agent, when I market a property, I do photos on that property, I do video, I do print, I do everything in order to get the most exposure for that property, because I believe that exposure drives demand and demand drives price. So when you hire me, my goal is to help you get the most exposure on that home. So I'm going to do all of the things, leave no stone unturned. So if for some reason you decide to cancel the agreement a week, a month in, then chances are I'm going to lose money on that deal. Now, in a perfect world, I would love to be compensated for the money I've spent if you do decide to back out of that contract before it actually terminates. But here's the thing, I don't actually build that into the listing agreement. I only put the one phrase in the listing agreement that says the seller has the opportunity to back out for any reason, with the hope that if the seller does change their mind, then they'll reimburse me for any expenses that I've had. But here's what I'll say, that doesn't always happen. I just listed a home about 2 weeks ago that I had on the market for no less than 3 days. We had only done the photos on that property. The seller pressured me to come to the market before we actually had the video done, before we had all of the marketing done. And 3 days into listing that home, they were wondering why it hadn't sold. Now, I realized really, really quickly that me and this seller probably weren't going to get along. They had expectations that were unrealistic. And so they called me and asked me to cancel the listing agreement, which I did with the hope that they were going to reimburse me for the money spent. Well, they wanted the photos that I did. They wanted the video that I took the time to create. And unfortunately, I wasn't willing to just give that to them because I had spent time, money, effort, energy, everything on that. And so when I told them that, well, they told me, well, we're not going to pay you for what you've done. So I think that actually says more about the seller than it does about me, because I allowed them out of the contract. Here's the thing, as an agent, I didn't actually have that language that I'm talking about in that specific listing agreement. And I could have held them to a 6-month contract, not allowing them to relist their home, not allowing them to go back to the market with another agent. Now, I couldn't have forced them to sell their home, but I could have enforced the contract and kept them off the market until it expired. But here's the thing, I'm a 20-year veteran of this business, and this business to me is all about relationships. So in cases like that, I like to be the better person, because I wouldn't want to be held to a contract that I don't want to be in. So the number one way you can avoid this when signing anything is first have the conversation up front in the listing presentation. And if for some reason you feel like there's an opportunity that you might get stuck in a contract with someone that you're unsure about, make sure they put that clause for cancellation in that contract. before you ever sign anything. Now, before we move on to the next one, I want to ask you a question. Do you think I handled that situation the right way? Do me a favor and let me know in the comments. Now, the next thing I want you to never agree to when selling your home is disclosing your bottom line to your agent. Imagine telling your agent you'll take $800,000 for your home when it's priced at, say, $875,000. Now, in many cases, guess where that offer ends up? $800,000, which means you just negotiated against yourself. And where this is especially dangerous is if the agent that's representing you to sell your home also ends up representing the buyer that ends up buying your home. Now, we all like to believe that real estate agents are ethical, that they go by the practice, that they have your best interest in mind, and that they would never use your negotiation against you. But here's the thing. As your home sits on the market, offers aren't coming in, and buyers start calling in, well, asking what's wrong? Why is the home sitting on the market? Is there an offer that your seller would take? Well, all it takes is for that agent to remember that you said that you would take $800,000 for your home. So instead of talking about your bottom line, I would like you to keep negotiations focused on market value and terms, not your specific price goal. At the end of the day, you want your agent to work for you to get top dollar for your home, not just close a deal. Understand, in today's market, homes are sitting on the market longer. It may take you a couple of price reductions, a couple of price improvements in order to get activity on your home. In some cases, in order to get offers on your home. So remember, as a seller, just because people aren't knocking down your door with offers doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with your home or that your home is substantially overpriced. You have to understand that the market is shifting, is turning more into the traditional market that it was prior to the pandemic, where there's seasonality in the market, there's ebbs and flows. Homes sit on the market for weeks, sometimes months, before they actually go under contract. And with that said, it's your real estate agent's job to keep you updated on what's going on in the market. Well, not only what's happening locally with your market, what's happening, in your area, what's happening nationwide, what's driving buyer demand, what's impacting supply. All of these things are important when it comes to listing your home. And the reason I bring this up is because I just got off the phone with a potential listing prior to making this video. And one of the conversations we were having is why their home wasn't selling. And I said, well, is your agent calling you or updating you every single week with communication, telling you about the showings, telling you about activity, about feedback, what's happening in the market? And unfortunately said, no, my agent isn't saying any of that at all. In fact, I think my agent's panicking a little bit because my home isn't selling. So before you agree to a specific listing agent to sell your home, do your due diligence, vet that agent. Make sure they understand your local market. Make sure they have experience, not only in the current environment, but in a more traditional environment prior to the pandemic. Things are shifting around. It's not the same market that it was. In fact, it's changing every day, every week. And you need somebody that can convey that to you, somebody that can hold your hand, take the emotion out of the equation, and provide some logic and guidance through that process. Now, with that said, I've created a vetted network of agents just like me all over the country that do business just like I do. Over 20 years in the business, I've been meeting people, building relationships where I've been able to refer sellers just like you to agents just like me. So if you're looking for somebody that does business like me anywhere in the United States, do me a favor and check that link in the description. Now, the next thing I think you should never do kind of goes hand in hand with our current housing market, and that's I never want you to accept a vague or a weak contingent offer. And what I mean by that, there are a lot of people out there looking to buy a home that also need to sell their home, but they haven't done the necessary steps in order to get their home on the market first. So these are people looking to buy your home, potentially tie it up, without even having their home on the market or in escrow. And this is one of the things I'm seeing a lot at the moment, because there are a lot of sellers out there that want to move, but they're looking at inventory and they're not really seeing what they want in the current selection, so they're just kind of staying put. And then all of a sudden one pops on the market that catches their eye, and then it's off to the races. They're calling me and saying, hey Jeb, we just found a property that we want to make an offer on. And I'm like, great, well, what are we going to do with your current property? Well, we need to sell that. Well, my question to them is, do we need to sell that in order to buy that property in the offer? And the answer is usually yes. We need the money from this transaction in order to buy that home. And then I'm scrambling trying to make an offer on a property where their home isn't even listed. And here's the thing, most of the time it is a complete waste of time to make an offer on a property if your home isn't at least listed, or better yet, under contract. And that's because most sellers don't want to lock up their property and keep it off the market while entertaining an offer that still has to go through that process of taking photos, getting it online, getting offers, negotiating, all of that stuff. Because while doing that, you can't actually market your property effectively. And then better yet, what happens to a buyer who has made a contingent offer on your property that never goes under contract on their home, or maybe decides to, after a couple of months of having their home listed, listed decides to take it off. Well, you just wasted all of that time with that contingent offer when you could have been actively marketing your property to try to sell it to a different buyer. So if you are a seller considering a contingent offer, make sure you're vetting the process. Make sure you're going through, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, looking at the property, making sure it's under contract if you decide to accept something that is on contract. If it's not under contract, your agent should be looking at that property, the address, and telling you, if it's priced right, how long, properties in that area are sitting on the market, so that you have a realistic timeline of how long it would take that property to go under contract so that you're not tying yourself up. Now here's the reality. There's nothing wrong with contingent offers when you're doing it right. But what I'm seeing at the moment is a lot of desperate sellers out there. They're not getting traction on their home. And then a contingent offer comes in and they think, well, at least I have an offer now, so I'm willing to accept it, without doing the due diligence necessary to find out if it's actually an offer that will end up closing escrow. Which puts me into the next one about never accepting longer contingency periods. Understand that the contract here in the state of California gives any buyer 17 days to release contingencies on your property. And that's all contingencies. That's the loan, that's the appraisal, the home inspection, the seller disclosures, the title report, as well as the HOA docs on that home if it has one. Because remember, the longer the contingencies, the longer your home stays off the market to any other potential buyers out there. And the last thing you want to do as a seller is tie your home up. So instead of allowing longer contingencies, you should rather be trying to negotiate shorter contingencies on your home. Most of the time when I'm representing a seller, we're trying to get the home inspection, the loan contingency, the appraisal, everything done within about 10 days, which is plenty of time from a buyer side. And the reason we want these shorter time frames is because if we can get through that contingency period, it gives you a better idea, better understanding of the actual timeline and whether or not your property is going to close. Now, just because they've released contingencies on your property doesn't necessarily mean it's going to close. I've seen deals fall apart at the very last hour and people lose deposits even after their contingencies have been released. Now, fortunately, I've never had it happen in my career, knock on wood, but it does happen. But what I'll say is I have about 99.9% certainty once contingencies are removed that deal is actually going to close. So the quicker you can get through that contingency phase, the better off you're going to be as a seller. Now, in some cases, you'll have lenders push back or real estate agents push back on the time frame, saying that they need more days or additional time. And one thing I like to do as an agent is try to negotiate that. Get them to agree to shorter time frames up front with the idea that, hey, listen, if we have open communication and you need a little bit more time, we'll give it to you, versus allowing it up front and not really knowing how they're going to communicate. Understand that everyone communicates great in the negotiation phase, but things seem to fall apart once deals are accepted in many cases. Sometimes you have a bad agent on the other side. Sometimes you have a bad lender on the other side. So when you have these shorter time frames, it forces people to communicate versus just dragging things along. Now, before we go into the next one, I'd like to take a minute and ask a favor. If you find any value in my videos at all, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up. And if you're a seller looking to stay on top of everything about the selling process, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Now, the next thing I never want you to do is accept a weak pre-approval, or better yet, a buyer who hasn't been pre-approved at all. Understand, yes, the market is softer, things are taking a little bit longer, but the last thing you want to do is tie yourself up with a buyer who actually isn't approved to buy a home. So not only should your agent be vetting these buyers with a pre-approval, they should also be calling the lender, having a conversation, and also be getting the proof of funds for the down payment. I've seen it time and time again where a buyer's trying to buy a home and they're getting a refinance out of another property in order to do it, but they don't disclose that. They just say, hey, we're putting this amount down in order to buy the home, without saying where those funds are going to come from. So one thing I like to do as a real estate agent is not only get the pre-approval, but also get the proof of where the funds are. If you can't show me you have the funds now, then that's not a good sign. On top of that, there are things you can do to vet that buyer, especially when it's a conforming loan. There should be a DU or LP approval in there that you can take a look at. And if you don't understand that, then you can get that information and give it to your lender so that they can take a look at it and tell you whether or not that buyer is a strong candidate. The other thing is you can have them cross-qualify with your lender, but that needs to be done before you ever accept that offer. Now, the next one you have to be very, very careful as a seller on is accepting an offer from a buyer who hasn't actually seen your property in person. Now, in some cases, this can be hard to manage, especially if they say they've been to the open house or what have you. But typically what happens is a call comes in from a buyer to the agent, and it says, hey, listen, we're out of town or whatever, and we weren't able to make the open house, and my client would like to make an offer on your home. One thing I do as the agent representing you as the seller is I go back to the agent and say, hey, listen, my client's not willing to consider any offers where the buyer hasn't actually walked through the property. Yeah, I understand your client loves the home, they've seen it online, but they need to walk through it. They need to see it. And now, this isn't really that common, but it does happen, especially when you have out-of-area agents and out-of-area buyers that maybe don't have the time, or it's not a short drive to your property, so they just want to make an offer, tie it up, and then when they get an opportunity, they'll come in for the inspection or what have you and walk through the property. Now, what I've seen happen more often than not is that these buyers come in and then they try to renegotiate. They try to change the terms of the contract because they never saw it to begin with. Now, on most normal, traditional real estate sales, this isn't a problem, but if you have a property that needs a lot of work, maybe it's a flip, maybe it's some sort of rehab deal, this is where you see it way, way more often because buyers are looking just to put in an offer and hope it gets accepted with the idea that, hey, if they accept my number, and then we'll do our due diligence to figure out if that's actually the right number for that home. So before you sign anything, just verify through your agent that that buyer's actually seen the property. Maybe it was through a private showing or maybe it was through an open house, but either way, you need confirmation that that buyer's walked the home before you ever sign the contract. Now, the next one is something I've seen happen time and time again, and it's something you should never consider as a seller, and that's allowing the buyers who are buying your home to move in before that property actually closes and records. Understand that deals get delayed all the time at the last minute. Say maybe a deal is supposed to close on a Friday and now it's tied up and it's not going to close to Monday because there was something missing from the loan, or maybe the county was closed, or whatever it is. It pushed that deal off until the next business day. In this case, it's 3 days later. Well, in some cases, maybe that buyer already has a moving truck, or they're selling their home and they have to be out, and they're coming to you saying, well, hey, can we at least move into the property since we got everything done before the property actually records? Your answer should always be no, because for one, it's an insurance issue. Second, if that deal falls apart at the last minute and that buyer's not able to fund, now they're in the property and you have to deal with getting them out. They have to deal with moving. There's just a lot that goes on in that scenario that can be avoided by not allowing it at all. So never ever allow an early possession. Now, in the case of a rent back on a property, if somebody's staying in after the fact, they have a rental agreement, then that's a completely different scenario. But please don't allow people to move in without agreement, without something in writing, so that you're ultimately protected when it comes to selling your home. I think the moral of the story here is that sellers who stay in control get better prices, along with fewer problems, and they end up closing on their deal. So never agree to anything that gives up your leverage. But here's my question to you. Which one of the ones that I discussed today actually surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. Now, if you are a seller considering selling your property and you're wondering what the one thing is you can do to your property to get you the most amount of money in the quickest amount of time without really spending any money at all, do me a favor and check out this video here.